It's Mike here, and today, the top 5 carnivore myths debunked. These are at least 5 that I hear a lot. If you have different ones, let me know down below. We're talking about things like, does meat contain all the nutrients that you need? Or, is oxalate dumping actually real? And what about the dismissal of the whole vitamin C scurvy concern? We're gonna cover that and a ton more, way too much. But these are myths that lure people into the carnivore diet, and it's part of the whole ethos of the diet, which I think is misinformation. We're gonna look at research that I believe backs that. But again, a lot of the carnivore diet argument is that like, oh, there isn't science against it. Well, because there is no freaking science on it, essentially. So I'll use the science that I can, but I'll also speak in their language, which is anecdotes, by even looking at a bunch of cases on Reddit. But we do have some case reports as well, which is always good to look at. So let's just get right into it. Myth number 1, meat has all the nutrients that you need. Yes, looking to chronometer for that classic 2 pounds of steak a day that a lot of people follow on the carnivore diet. Yeah, the nutrition gaps be gapping. First up, we have vitamin B1, which is low AF. B5 misses it a bit, but for B1 deficiency symptoms, they include irritability, which you will see in the comments, poor memory, literally forgetting to eat plants. It's wild. But weight loss as well, so, there's a win. We have folate, which is abysmally low in terms of intake. And yeah, it is the case that Michaela Peterson, carnivore dieter, appears to have gotten a folate deficiency, as she said on Twitter months back. And looking to Reddit's r/carnivore, we can just see a ton of folate deficiency or low level results for those people that actually bother checking it. Obviously, you want to have a healthy level of folate. Anyway, onto the vitamins. We have vitamin A, super low, vitamin C, D, E, K. I mean, do I need to go through the whole alphabet at this point? This is ridiculous. And we're gonna go really deep into vitamin C and research on that later on. But just looking through r/carnivore for deficiencies was when I saw that I wasn't expecting, and that was vitamin B12. From the comments, it appears that the poster isn't the only one with this issue, and those commenters say just take B12 supplements. Next time people attack vegans for B12, I'm just gonna hand them a printed version of that post. We continue with minerals with super low calcium, copper, magnesium, and manganese. And one Jasmine Foster did a 100+ reference write-up on just how much one might miss their targets for these nutrients, and it's wild. Like, grass-fed or not, you're likely to be about 80% short on your calcium intake. And then there's things you're getting way too much of, like you're getting too much saturated fat, too much trans fat, and definitely too much cholesterol. And then finally, in terms of fat, it is totally devoid of omega-3 fatty acids. Like, look at that. That is ridiculous. And the higher mountain grass-fed is still laughably low. And yeah, people can eat fish for it, but a lot of people are just focusing on ruminant meat on a carnivore diet. All right, now for myth number 3, oxalate dumping is real, / just the whole oxalate theory of disease or just health issues in pretty normal people. It is the case that people with like severe kidney issues are gonna have more oxalate problems. But it's at a point where oxalate dumping has become a catch-all term for any problem that somebody is facing on a carnivore diet. That should probably lead them to quitting, but no, that's just purification. You're just dumping these plant-based toxic oxalates out of your body. Here is a carnivore GP listing the dangers of oxalate dumping.
Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, rashes, fatigue, weakness, palpitations, joint pains, inflammation, arthritis, autoimmune activation. Any kind of autoimmune system and problem, can seriously flare when you get oxalate dumping.
And carnivores blame it for even more. I mean, everything from autoimmune diseases in general, which is probably the main one that I hear, to autism. Yep, you heard that right. And yeah, it is the case that dietarily, there's a distinction there, dietarily, you are getting them from plants. But as this study found, cooked vegetable consumption was associated with 75% lower odds of rheumatoid arthritis, which is obviously an autoimmune disease. And they're telling you to stop eating that to fight things like arthritis. And instead, advise meat only when studies like this one show meat consumption linked to twice the arthritis risk. And major credit to Dr. Sarah Ballantine, who has a PhD in medical biophysics, who did a couple videos on oxalates and a more modern one.
Under normal circumstances, the body has mechanisms to maintain oxalate homeostasis, regardless of how much oxalates we ingest.
No, she isn't a vegan, if that helps, and she mentions that your body actually makes a ton of its own oxalates. And I would add that means you can never purify, you can never fully dump those oxalates. And to elaborate on her claims, yes, from this study, 60 to 80% of your blood oxalates are made by yourself endogenously, so you ain't dodging this, G. Unsubscribe. Or please subscribe and help me get to 400K, because I'm like on the brink. Please. On her chart here, she mentions that the amino acid glycine is one of the precursors for endogenously made oxalates. It is the case that vitamin C is also one. I know carnivores are gonna be like, huh, yeah, it's all from the vitamin C. Well, hey, let's look at this. In terms of your carnivore diet, meat appears to be the main source of glycine in a normal diet. So when you're eating 2 pounds of that, you're gonna be getting about 16 grams of glycine on your 2-pound meat a day diet, yet just probably in the hundreds of milligrams at best of dietary vitamin C from normal natural sources. So which one is your liver gonna make more oxalates out of in this context? Well, to further support this, I wish we had some good human studies, but from this rat study where they fed the mice glycine as well as some collagen proteins that have glycine in them also, they found unexpectedly high amounts of endogenously formed oxalate in their poop, as well as 90% of these rats developing urinary stones in 38 days. And yeah, that is one of the concerns. There's calcium oxalate kidney stones, which are the most common type. But do you escape this, especially with all that glycine coming through? Well, this Redditor said, I got kidney stones a few weeks into a carnivore diet. The top commenter said, that's oxalate dumping for ya. At least another less liked comment admitted to seeing long-term carnivores getting kidney stones. And yes, just to fact check that, from the University of Iowa in my home state here, yes, stone formation can happen in a matter of weeks. And of course, we're talking about a keto diet here generally for people on a carnivore diet, and we see a lot of kidney stones in the literature there. A lot of times those are uric acid stones because the purines in meat form those. And uric acid is also what causes gout, which is another inflammatory joint issue. You get those crystals in there. Here's another Redditor who actually got gout for the first time in his life just 4 weeks into his carnivore diet. All right, and now a quick break with today's sponsor, Seeds DS01 Daily Synbiotic, which yes, is a prebiotic and a probiotic together. And it's especially beastly because it's got 53.6 billion active bacterial cell units from 24 different strains, which are scientifically shown to support various areas of health, including gut barrier, gut immunity, digestive health, skin health, heart health, and more. And on the topic of a carnivore diet, I know a lot of people go on a carnivore diet for random like immune issues. And one of those is eczema, but strains in seed from randomized controlled trials are shown to greatly improve eczema in children from this chart, which is quite impressive over placebo, as well as in adults. Also very impressive. And then of course, randomized controlled trials like this one show strains in seed improving, that ease of expulsion and the pooping regularity for people. So very on topic. Anyway, Lindy and I have been taking seed for about 3 years now and loving it. She's always touting her improvements. And if you would like to try Seed's DS01 Daily Symbiotic, you can just click the link below and use the code Mike25 for 25% off your first month's supply. All right. Anyway, on to the next myth. Myth number 3. Electrolyte supplements are normal and all of this is natural. There's this whole narrative here that we are apex predators that are designed to be eating all of this meat all of the time. But then I have to ask, do lions need to take all the electrolyte supplements that these carnivores are constantly taking? I don't think so. A large portion of the discussions that I see on these carnivore forums is about electrolytes, how they're probably not taking enough supplements or taking LMNT, which is a certain brand, which I'm pretty sure stands for Lion Man Needs This. But what's up with this? What's the explanation for why these people need to down these electrolytes all the time just to feel normal? And we'll talk about the symptoms, but here is a carnivore life coach, Kate, 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. Here she is.
On any version of a low carbohydrate diet, whether that be a carnivore diet or a keto diet, we need more electrolytes. This is because when insulin levels are low, as they are when you restrict carbohydrates, the kidneys excrete more sodium and this disrupts other electrolyte levels as well.
Yeah, the body is so clearly designed to be consuming carbs that when you don't, your insulin level goes so low that you need to like add random minerals in high amounts just to not feel like you're gonna pass out. Yeah, and of course down below she sells some fancy type of salt, but it interestingly doesn't appear that lions need to get sodium from any other source. They're just able to eat meat. Their body is adapted to do that. It might be a little bit of a red flag that these carnivorous animals don't need to be taking large amounts of electrolyte supplements, but yeah, anyway. And to combine things together here, ironically, as this study found, going back to kidney stones, high meat and higher sodium intake both made kidney stone resistance worse. Yeah, so what's happening if you don't get these electrolytes more specifically? Well, one of those things in the short term, at least, is the keto flu, perhaps other issues in the long term, but from LMNT's website, headaches, fatigue, cramps, and other symptoms of keto flu often follow when we don't get enough of these vital minerals, especially sodium, and as a result, people stagger around in a low-energy, cranky fuzz. The truth is, those who eat a ketogenic, paleo, or low-carb diet simply need more sodium than the general population. I actually know somebody who's on a low-carb diet and passed out, so I just had to look it up, and yeah, the forums have quite a few cases of people just sharing their classic keto passing out stories. It's just a rite of passage for some people. And yes, we also see passing out on a carnivore diet specifically. That brings us to another sub-myth that all these weird, nasty symptoms are just, they're not that big of a deal. It's totally healthy.
Just last week, I had a subscriber asking me why she was experiencing heart palpitations since switching to carnivore. We realized that her sodium intake was probably lower than it should be. And since making that change, the palpitations have went away.
From a carnivore diet coach, heart palpitations, pounding heart, and flutters are a common side effect of the carnivore diet, but in most cases, it's usually temporary and nothing to worry about. They of course say that it could be from a lack of electrolytes. And from this carnivore.diet article approved by Sean Baker, carnivore extraordinaire, in addition to the keto flu, you could see leg cramps, constipation, bad breath, again, heart palpitations, decreased athletic performance, hair loss, and our next one that we're gonna get to, high LDL cholesterol, which they of course believe is just fine. And I would add on to this by saying the amount of cases of just diarrhea or constipation, it's just a yo-yo that I see on these forums, is nuts. And they're all like, oh, I've had diarrhea for months, but maybe someday I'll dump enough oxalates to like cure my chronic diseases that you told me I have. The amount of nausea posts I see on forums is actually off the charts. Well, that brings us to myth number 4, which is that high LDL cholesterol, bad cholesterol, is just absolutely fine and healthy. In general, carnivore dieters and experts are either completely dismissing the dangers of LDL or massively downplaying them. I mean, we're talking about people often getting to 200, 300, 400, 500, even 1,000, as we'll discuss in a second, when under 100 is considered conventionally optimal, below 70, even better. And they're, of course, having to evolve the argument for this all the time. They have remnant cholesterol as an excuse, which I have a whole video on, and how that is not a valid excuse. I wish I could go into all the detail here again, but it'd be another 10 minutes. And then they also have the lean mass hyperresponder, like presentation, pre-study baseline results. Everyone's going, we're all immune, we're all lean mass hyperresponders. I have a whole video on that. But even the researchers who did that meekly warn that you're probably not a lean mass hyperresponder if you think you are. I am of the belief that it might as well be lean mass hyper smoker in defense of smoking because of the way that the research was done. But this is where I want to hit a particular excuse that I haven't addressed yet, and that is the notion that, oh, well, high LDL doesn't matter as long as your inflammation is low. It's like you need a match to actually light the fire. Well, that's bogus. First of all, we have children who have familial hypercholesterolemia who obviously don't have high inflammation. They're children, but they have genes that make it so just their LDL goes up and they have, bad atherosclerosis. And then if you put them on LDL lowering medication, you can actually reverse the volume of those plaques. But it's not just my word here. We have multiple highly credentialed experts in this field saying the same thing about inflammation not being required. For example, Nutrition Made Simple interviewed a couple of them, like Professor Kaushik Ray, president of the European Atherosclerosis Society, who's published over 200 studies. Here he is.
If you have inflammation, you accelerate this process. So it's an accelerant in that case, in that situation. But similarly, that if that wasn't true, so if you didn't have inflammation accelerating that process, you had zero inflammation, you'd still get atherosclerosis. But what would happen is the particles get into the wall and your body produces an inflammatory response.
And we also have a lipidologist out of a Lipoproteins Institute. That's Dr. William Cromwell, again, interviewed by Nutrition Made Simple. Here's what he says.
I am not a person who says that inflammation does not matter at all. I'm a person who says inflammation is not where it starts very frequently. Inflammation is added as the process gathers momentum and plaques become more mature over time. All right, so as a result, people say you have to have inflammation in order for ApoB to cause a plaque. You do not. But once we have a plaque, more ApoB feeds the plaque, it grows. And the more inflammation, the more the plaque not only grows, but becomes unstable and leads you to more event behavior.
So you heard it from him, and then more specifically, it's the case that LDL can enter the arterial wall through transcytosis. That doesn't require like a high level of chronic inflammation or anything like that. And of course, that can build up, and the more LDL you have, the more likely that that's going to happen. He talks about that for a sec.
The primary purpose of LDL particles is to transport cholesterol to the liver. That's its primary purpose. By doing that, we're maintaining the normal physiology. But if it's around for long periods of time and our quantity is high, it will transcytose into areas that are not its principal target.
And there's, of course, the excuses about the large, fluffy LDL, which I've gone into a bunch, and Cromwell covers that really well. You know, he's studying these lipid counts for a living, essentially. And I just have to add that it is the case that large versus small particles are not very different in size from this study, 23.5 versus 27.5 microns on average for large versus small. So it's not like a grape versus a basketball. It's like one orange versus a slightly smaller orange. And for the bigger picture, Mendelian randomization, looking at genetic different trials with that show that LDL is causal to atherosclerosis. That's the best data we have here. And obviously a ton of people have had their anecdotal cases of heart issues or cardiovascular issues on a carnivore diet, which have pretty much all been dismissed. But thankfully, that beauty YouTuber who I did a video on before that had a stroke has now gone to a plant-based diet with the help of Esselstyn, to try and fight it, despite originally convincing herself that it had nothing to do with the carnivore diet. But it is wild to see how the community responds. I mean, here's a guy essentially describing the symptoms of a heart attack. He even took enough electrolytes, and people are like, oh, that's from what you ate before your carnivore diet. And then we also have this person saying, whenever they add fatty meals as they're transitioning to carnivore, they get chest pain. They were recommended ox bile as a solution. All right, now we're gonna get even more into the nitty gritty with the last myth that I've left here, and that is myth number 5, that a carnivore diet doesn't give people scurvy, and also that your vitamin C requirement is lower. Carnivores are built differently. Yeah, you saw that vitamin C intake on the Chronometer app. It is the case that there's an abysmally low amount that they don't even count in meat, and that can vary a little bit, but it's still extremely low. So you're gonna be really on the low end here, and just right in the beginning, I have to say that studies over and over again show that higher levels of vitamin C are associated with lower levels of mortality. So you wanna be on the higher end. But I've seen many times carnivore doctors just completely denying there's no such thing as scurvy on a carnivore diet. Nobody gets it. I don't think it's super duper common because people are probably cheating and other things that we're gonna talk about here. But James Blunt, the singer, got scurvy on his carnivore diet. I don't know why they never mentioned that. I'm scurvyful, it's true. But there are also some other cases in the literature here that I have not mentioned on this channel. So let's look to this case report. We have a young person out of Dubai eating an exclusively meat-based diet. Ironically, not just being anemic, but having straight up scurvy with skeletal issues. And the next one is easily my favorite title of any study I've read in a long time. It's Scurvy in an Unrepentant Carnivore. It's a 54-year-old Appalachian dude who ate essentially mostly canned beef for his diet. It wasn't looking good for him. He had a 4x2 centimeter sack of dark bloody fluid drained. He was then given vitamin C pills, but after running out of those and getting other health issues, he sought medical attention and admitted that his diet was still limited to canned beef. They go as far as to say that a diagnosis of scurvy can be made with not just symptoms, but also a diet that is devoid of fruits and vegetables. together. And while I am stretching here a little bit, it is the case that there are quite a few scurvy symptoms on these carnivore forums like this one talking about keratosis pilaris, which is pretty common, but at least somebody recommended vitamin C, which I thought was interesting in the comments. Of course, you can get vitamin C from organ meats, but that's just gonna make you sick in another way because it's disgusting. So what do people use to dismiss this? Well, a lot of it has to do with claims by Dr. Chafee, for example, this carnivore doctor who is literally afraid of plants. Like, I feel like the landscape section in Walmart, he'll just run the other way. Like, they're trying to kill him, is what I responded to before. And he says this is a transporter competition issue. Here he is.
One of those is vitamin C as well. So when you're eating carbohydrates use a GLUT4 transporter to get into your system, be utilized around your body. Same transporter is used for vitamin C. When you're eating a bunch of carbohydrates, that drowns out the vitamin C, and so you need an overabundance of vitamin C in order to absorb the little that you need, and you really only need a little.
So is this true? Is there some traffic jam that occurs with your GLUT4 transporter with vitamin C here? Well, just even a quick look at the biology here shows that the main form of vitamin C, ascorbic acid, is actually transported using a sodium transporter. It is the oxidized version, dehydroascorbic acid, that uses GLUT4, as you can see from this diagram. So it makes it way less likely that there's some sort of weird traffic jam going on, which was just speculation in the first place. And not to get too in the weeds here, but he does go on and make what I think is a bogus claim that like Vikings didn't get scurvy because they were eating so much meat, and meat helps them with vitamin C.
And look at the Vikings and things like that. They sailed all over the world. They sailed to the New World, and they were not bringing a bunch of lemons and limes. They had packed barrels full of salted meat, right? They didn't get scurvy.
But yeah, from this actually published paper, there is an old Norwegian name for scurvy, skirbegjur, which was first used in a Viking saga 1,000 years ago. And that the Old Norse population actually knew about how plants could help with it, such as cabbage, which, many people, historians I've read, say they just put cabbage on the ship too. And yeah, this is showing up on these Reddit forums with one post about their vitamin C deficiency in blood results, despite even eating liver for vitamin C. And the number one comment was that blood tests don't reflect tissue levels. And I should add that just in addition to that way lower mortality risk with higher vitamin C, low levels of vitamin C can have other symptoms that are notable, like leading to lower immune function, which we've seen bad results with that with COVID on low carb diets. This can occur after many weeks of deficient intake. But it's funny, this carnivore site was like putting the amount of vitamin C in meat up against the percent that you would need to prevent scurvy. And even though in the beginning of the article they said that you can eat enough to prevent scurvy, they're still landing at like 15 to 25% of what you would need. Like that's the goal that they have. It's like 1/9 as much as you need for your RDA. So in the end, while we covered some of these myths, I still feel like we're at the tip of the iceberg here. We didn't even touch on things like the Randall cycle and how carbs and fat like don't mix, or like isotope analyses for why we're meant to be carnivore. I didn't even touch on how something's ability to get rid of diabetes temporarily doesn't mean that it's healthy or really truly healing you in the long run. I mean, for example, Danielle Bellardo, cardiologist's patient going on a Coke binge who had diabetes and no longer having it when they came back just from lower calorie intake. Anyway, so I probably need to do a part 2, but it's pretty clear that there is a risk of not getting enough nutrients on a carnivore diet, which is so ironic because they're constantly like poo-pooing vegans for a lot of these nutrients that we're actually doing amazingly well on from the recent studies, like B12 having better status than meat eaters in some cases. And of course, whether we're talking about oxalates and oxalate dumping and causing disease, as well as electrolytes just being normal, natural, and necessary, and just random horrible symptoms all the time. Like, yeah, I think you're getting the idea that these carnivore diet people, might not be getting the best information, which again is unfortunate because they're just trying to be healthy, and a lot of these negative effects, like with LDL, can take a long time to develop, or they can really hurt people really fast, which is sad. So anyway, on that note, if you would like to try Seeds DS01 Daily Symbiotic, you can again click the link below and use the code Mike25 for 25% off your first month's supply. And again, comment what you think the biggest myth I missed, or if I should do a sequel. Like, subscribe, get me to 400K, all that good stuff, and thanks for watching.